doctor? Yes. I mentioned before lunch, 2 years ago we kind of joked about medical marijuana, and now it's becoming more of a reality. And our next speaker is going to share with us his experience working with some new strategies for patient health. And Dr. Aung-Din has practiced General Neurology and Neuro-Psychiatry in Sarasota for over 25 years. He currently functions as Principal Investigator in a number of ongoing drug research studies. He's also active in treating varied neurological and psychiatric conditions using delivery of CNS-active drugs with direct effects of topical delivery. After studies in mechanical and environmental engineering at Bucknell in Pennsylvania and Cornell universities, Dr. Aung-Din worked for a period in industry as a supervising engineer. All right. And then he studied at Columbia University in New York City for pre-med, followed by medical school at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical School in Dallas, and performed his residencies in Neurology and Neurosurgery at University of Florida in Gainesville, Florida. If you had asked Dr. Aung-Din about medical marijuana 5 years ago, he would have brushed it aside. Today he is here to share with us how medical marijuana is enhancing lives. Please welcome Dr. Aung-Din.
Thank you, John, for that introduction. As John said, I'm a practicing neurologist here in Sarasota, Florida. And what I'm going to tell you today is kind of a journey of my enlightenment to medical cannabis. In other words, about 6 years ago, as he said, I didn't want to do anything about it. I didn't know anything about it. I was stigmatized, and I wouldn't even consider my practice. And later on, I became the first doctor in Sarasota to be certified by the Department of Health Compassionate Registry to prescribe medical marijuana or cannabis. And I became the second neurologist in the state of Florida. And now my practice is some 50% involved in medical cannabis. And if you had told me that a couple of years back, I would say, no way, this is not going to happen. Because the bottom line is, you've got to be open in life. So what I want to talk to you today is about the science and the history of medical cannabis in America. You know, when I looked at the history of cannabis, I was flabbergasted because it's been around for 6,000 years. It's been in the pharmacopoeia of China for 6,000 years. And in fact, it was in the US from 1850 to 1937 as one of the top 3 medical compounds prescribed. And lately, it's made a resurgence into medical practices out of clinical necessity. What do I mean by that? Because traditional pharmaceuticals have not met needs in certain conditions, such as seizures, autism. And as John said, I've done 60 clinical trials bringing pharmaceuticals to market, and I realized that this is a different compound altogether. And no doubt it's the most controversial therapeutic compound I've ever come across. And the controversy is not just because of how it works and why it works, but because of all the politics and all the self-interest that are involved. So we're dealing with a compound that is very interesting, and as John said, it's now front and center in America. So look at this National Geographic and Newsweek articles. What it tells you is that these are not traditional medical journals, are they? This has been a grassroots movement. What do I mean by that? Parents and families have started this because they're dealing with family members and kids who are not being met by traditional medicine, specifically seizures and autism. In fact, I thank Sanjay Gupta for his Weed 1, 2, and 3 series. Did you all see that on CNN? Sanjay is a neurosurgeon, and I trained in neurosurgery too. So when I saw his series, I said, you know, he's a respected neurosurgeon, well-trained. If he believes in it, I better take a look at it. So that's when my journey started. But this is the headlines in the National Geographic article. There's really nothing new about cannabis americana, or cannabis or marijuana. It's been around humankind pretty much forever, as I said, 6,000 years. My own personal journey as to being open to using marijuana, medical cannabis, came as a result of desperate needs. As you know, many families were moving to Colorado because it was legalized there to get cannabis for their kids. It was moving to Colorado as the land of hope and healing. And I personally had an experience with that. But look at how these kids, some of them suffering 50 to 100 seizures a day, but look at the inexact science. Names like, King Bubba, poison, So what this cannabis medicine needs is some real sound scientific legitimacy. And that's how I got interested in it. And how I personally got interested was that I was giving a talk in San Antonio, Texas, and the pharmaceutical rep that was taking me around, Cynthia, said, "You probably won't see me again." I said, "How come?" "We're moving to Colorado." I said, "Why?" "My son, who was Alan, 22 years old, when he was 15, had his head crushed in a truck accident on a farm and had 5 brain surgeries, and he's now having intractable seizures, on the verge of suicide, had to drop out of college, and we're going to go for medical marijuana." And then later on she wrote me a note saying, "I heard about your delivery, that patented delivery, which is non-systemic, as a cream, direct effects, which John mentioned. Would you try that with CBD, the non-psychogenic component of marijuana?" I read that letter and I said, "No way, I don't know anything about CBD, I don't want to deal with medical marijuana, I don't want to get in trouble with DEA." Unfortunately, my wife read the letter. We have 4 kids, and the mother hen component came in and she said, "Honey, you don't have a choice. She's desperate, she's asking you." So I said, "Okay, bring him here to Sarasota." It came in 3 days. I did the CBD. He's been seizure-free 3 years, graduated from college, got a standing ovation in commencement, and it changed my whole perspective. It changed his life, but changed my perspective in terms of the potential of cannabis. Now, as I told you, 1850 to 1937 was a golden age of medical cannabis in America. In fact, U.S. pharmaceutical companies were selling it. And you'll recognize some of the companies in that one of them was Pfizer, which was then at that time Park Davis, and Eli Lilly. You heard the name Eli Lilly, which introduced Prozac and Cymbalta, and they joint partnered and had a farm in Indiana, and we're growing cannabis Americana because we were getting from India before, cannabis indica. So what I'm saying is that cannabis was a big part of American medicine. So what happened? Well, first of all, in 1937, there was a Marijuana Tax Act. It was the first time that the name marijuana came about. They wanted to stigmatize cannabis. They changed it to a Mexican name, marijuana, to give it this sort of flavor to it that it was not good. And then 1941, it was removed from all pharmacopoeia. You couldn't get any evidence of it. So you ask yourself, what happened? Well, 1935, alcohol prohibition was lifted. And ATF was basically, needing a job. And they basically chose cannabis. Then since that time, there's been all this stigma, including traditional medicine. I was never taught, I was stigmatized, and wouldn't be open to it. But look at this, there's a patent in 2003, U.S. Patent 6630507, which says that the U.S. government, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, which is the parent organization for the FDA, which controls drug approvals, they have exclusive rights to use cannabis for a wide variety of diseases of oxidative stress, which you heard about, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, stroke. So there's somewhat of a disconnect in that cannabis has been considered controlled substance category 1, which means no medical use, highly addictive with LSD, cocaine, and heroin. But on the other hand, they have a patent for it. My attorney looked at that patent. It doesn't hold water because it's 6,000 years of prior art. That being said, it's there. But look at this here. These are 60 peer-reviewed studies of the benefits of medical marijuana. It goes everything from ALS to cancer to memory loss to multiple sclerosis, PTSD. In fact, when you look down there, there's some 68% positive clinical trials, which I've never seen in the 60 clinical trials I've been involved in. So you ask yourself, how can one compound do all that. This sounds like snake oil. And the reason being is that it works completely different than any other therapeutic compound that we use, and I'll go into that. As far as Florida, the START conditions were what were allowed by the Department of Health Compassionate Registry before Amendment 2, November 2016. And that was cancer, terminal illness, and you had to have 2 doctors document that the patient was going to live less than a year, then muscle spasms and intractable seizures. But Amendment 2, which passed, really opened things up. It said for a debilitating condition, in other words, a condition that was the patient was suffering from, which the physician and the patient agreed together was enough to make it available. And later, Renee's going to go into all the various forms of cannabis that can be obtained through now the Department of Health Compassionate Registry and the dispensaries that are popping up all over. There's one coming in Sarasota now, and there's one in Bradenton and Venice. Let's talk about how does it work? How does medical marijuana work? Well, if you look on the left-hand side, we're primarily concerned with the plant, right? The phytocannabinoid. But did you know that we make endocannabinoids? We make compounds which work like marijuana, and they bind CB1 and CB2 receptors. In fact, the gentleman on the right-hand side who I met 2 years ago, Dr. Raphael Mechoulam at Weizmann Institute in Israel, he was the one that discovered that we make compounds that bind cannabinoid receptors within our body. And these are the same receptors that medical marijuana works on. And also we have synthetic marijuana, such as Marinol, which has been around for about 15, 20 years, but it's synthetic, and therefore it's approved and is used for nausea and appetite. This is Dr. Mechoulam at Harvard Medical School when I met him in April 2016, telling us all the different conditions, and he says partial list of what cannabis does. And it goes alphabetically, appetite, mood, bone health, memory, mood, you can see it all there. But he said that one of his friends summarized it in that, what does it do? It makes you relax, eat, sleep, and protect. What else would you want in life, right? So, cannabinoids, they are chemical compounds that work on receptors on our cell surfaces. THC is what we are all worried about, tetrahydrocannabinol, which is the psychoactive. This is what gives you the high. CBD, cannabidiol, is the component that does not give you a high, but has the medical benefits. There are over 100 different cannabinoids found from the cannabis plant with various effects, and Dr. Mechoulam introduced the term entourage effect, which means one cannabinoid can have a certain effect, another one have a different effect. Combined, they have a better effect or different effect. So what are the potential uses medically for CBD? Well, there are many because it influences neurotransmission. Neurotransmission is the basis for which our neurological systems work. It works on the immune function, therefore cancer and certain immune-based issues like inflammation we talked about as well, and then cellular homeostasis and maintenance of functional cells. As I said earlier, cannabinoids are uniquely different from other neuroactive compounds we use. The traditional pharmaceuticals either block or stimulate receptors or physiological processes. For instance, Prozac is SSRI, serotonin reuptake inhibitor. Cannabinoids are different, they modulate. By modulation, Webster says, is changing or adjusting things within a system so they function in a balanced or proper fashion or amount. So when things are out of whack, whether it's neurological, immune, that's how cannabinoids work. That's why they work in so many different ways. On the left-hand side, you see a picture of 2 neurons communicating with each other. You probably know that for neurons to communicate, they have to release neurotransmitters across that gap called the synapse. Well, look how the green things there, which are the cannabinoids, they work upstream and influence neurotransmitter release. And then on the right-hand side, you see a cross-section of the human brain and all the concentrations of the cannabinoid receptors, CB1 receptors. everything from cerebral cortex for thinking, basal ganglia for movement, cerebellum for coordination, hippocampus for memory, and so forth. So our brains are full of cannabinoid receptors which cannabis can work on. And CBD, as a serotonin receptor agonist, is an antidepressant, neuroprotective. It modulates opioid receptors. We make endorphins, so it works for pain relief. It's not psychoactive. In fact, it treats diseases such as schizophrenia. And it works also in social isolation. In fact, I've given a lot of talks on PTSD, fibromyalgia, and autism, where there's a lot of social isolation with these individuals. This is what I call the million-dollar question. That's preventing a lot of physicians and a lot of families from considering cannabis. What about the psychoactivity? What about dependency? Is my kid going to get dependent and addicted? And what about long-term effects on personality and performance because their brains are developing? So the big question is there a means to minimize and prevent these systemic effects, systemic meaning blood-related effects, while preserving its benefits? And I'm glad to say that the direct effects technology, which I was privileged to develop 16 years ago, and for which I have 8 US and international patents, is a means of non-systemic delivery of neuroactive drugs. What it is that it uses the nerve endings, the back of the neck, which are connected to the brain, because the brain and the skin are made from the same embryologic tissue. You can see the nerve endings going right into the brainstem to send impulses. And this got cut off a little bit, but the skin surface, underneath the skin surface is free nerve endings, which have receptors on them. And this led to my study with CBD, which is the non-psychogenic component of marijuana, used as a cream, and look at the conditions it treated. And this formed the basis for my patent application for using CBD with direct effects. And it's pretty amazing when you look at it: seizures, anxiety, insomnia, hemifacial spasms, and these are some of the many conditions that autistic kids have. So they've been using this, and we've had many people seizure-free and benefiting. So the importance of cannabis is that it modulates, and through direct effects, we can use it in a way that works fast, within 15 minutes, in elderly people, debilitated patients, and appropriate children, because there's no blood-borne systemic effects. There's no hallucinogenic effect, there's no recreational value, and it's universally available because CBD is basically without legal constraints at this time. And then, as you probably know, this week, the first cannabis-based drug was federally approved, Epidiolex, through GW Pharmaceuticals. So we're making headway, and I believe that cannabis medicine is here to stay, and that we're going to see a lot more of it. And then I'm going to hand it over to Renee, who's going to talk about how these different compounds can be obtained through the dispensaries here in Florida. Thank you very much.